JC,
Hey Joe,
what's up?
how you doing?
How's life?
You know, crazy, but overall manageable and often good.
I like it.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's kind of tricky living in these modern times, I think. You know? It's wild.
it's true.
Well, it's great
Yeah,
to catch back up with you. I think the antidote to living through these modern times is having good music out there.
yeah, yeah.
In all reality. Yeah, so I'm looking forward to getting into the album and kind of living through, and I think that's kind of where I want to start. You know, coming out of the whole COVID thing, living in these modern times with all this weird stuff going on, how much of making this album and performing live are you cognizant of giving people that oasis to go into a different place?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's in a lot of ways that came just kind of internally for me, just kind of like, and that's how sort of this me getting sort of interested in using these effects in a lot of ways was just like trying to explore kind of a different layer of myself that I really didn't even know was there. And I think that's one thing that kind of came out of for a lot of us coming out of COVID. It's just kind of this, not even like self discovery, but just like oh, there's this other wing of my personality that I didn't even think I could explore. And so that was a big thing for me. But I think I mean, while you were just talking about that, I was just thinking about the Stevie Wonder tune that I closed the album with, and about how, that song "Love's in Need of Love Today" is really all about like trying to bring people together because love is literally in danger, and that's one. I talk about this in the liner notes. I went and saw Stevie live like right before the election last year, and it was just like this is what his tour was about, was just like how can we heal our broken hearts with love. And so that was like this at least I could do, is just kind of carry on that message that Stevie is trying to spread, and he always has basically his
Yeah.
whole life. So
So the name of the album in Japanese is actually called Electricity, correct?
yes, yeah.
So what was kind of the what's kind of the history of picking that term, being Japanese and electricity? What was the idea?
So my wife's Japanese, and so our daughter is part Japanese, and so for much of my adult life, my wife and I have been together for 14 years, and so much of my persona is kind of has to do with Japan. I've been over there 12 times, I think. Forget something like that.
Yeah.
Through her, I have a lot of Japanese friends. I love her family. And then on top of it, I was able to, employ the great Satoshi Takeshi on the recording, who's a friend of mine from New York, and one of the kind of deepest people I know on every level, not just musically. And so it's just like Japanese consciousness is just sort of interwoven in almost everything I do. And so I end up writing tunes that have Japanese titles or come from inspired from something in Japan or something like that. So that title just seemed to make sense. I was trying to figure it's like, it's like EQ plugged in, or, I was trying to think of like something that had to do with this fact that, this is a totally different sound for me and a totally different chapter in this very much more electrified version of what I've done my whole life as a musician. And so this just came to me, just like that totally makes sense
Yeah.
to kind of say that. And then at the same time, one of the most transformational recordings for me was my mentor, Bob Brookmeyer. He had a recording that came out in the early 90s called Electricity. And for him, it was also a very different sort of thing. He got to this stage, he was writing acoustic music his whole life, but he did this project with the WDR Big Band and John Abercrombie, and they had two synths, and it was just clearly a new sound for him that he really loved and kind of expanded his language in a lot of ways. And so I kind of felt, this kind of connection to that same sort of epiphany in a way, and this sort of like an avenue for a different kind of growth.
And speaking of growth, this is your eighth album. It's the electric quartet. It's like there's like a different vibe to it. And I remember during the pandemic thinking there was a lot more electronica that was going on. There was a lot of these new elements that were brought into what is traditionally known as kind of an acoustic realm. And even Bob Brookmeyer, towards the end of his life, there was a lot of electronic stuff that was going on.
Yeah.
What was kind of the thought of evolving and kind of doing this on this album specifically? Why now? Why this sound?
Yeah, I mean, so for one thing, living here in Minnesota, we have access to some incredible arts funding, mostly through the state arts board, and so that's one reason I've been able to make so many recordings over the years, is because those are almost entirely state funded. The last five or so, and so it's always like, what is my next project going to be? How can that sort of impact my local community, which is we live in a small town that's south of Minneapolis, and it was like I could make another standards record. I just did two standards records. That's something that's like maybe appealing. That people seem to like those recordings. I love playing standards. But I was experimenting with this electronics thing. I was doing a lot of free improvisation, just more kind of like textural ambient sort of things. But I kind of experimented, like, well, I could play. I kind of brought in. I was like, I could play some standards with in using this stuff. I was like, okay, that works. And then one of my other biggest influences is this guy named Hal Crook, he's not a household name necessarily, but he's kind of really monumental improviser and trombonist. And he did electronics in the '90s. And a lot of the same kind of things I started using. And he did on tunes, and I was like, wow, that's amazing that he can just make that sound like it makes sense to have all these weird, harmonizers and different kinds of effects and stuff. So, and it kind of just evolved from that. And I was like, well, I have some music that I've just started writing that kind of would lend itself to having these different kind of timbres. And, I've always used an acoustic bass player my whole life. And I was like, well, what would it be like if you have someone who's just like specifically an electric bassist, and you have a guitarist that is like has like acres of pedals himself and this sort of thing. And it just kind of seemed like this is going to be an interesting new chapter for me. I could either kind of do what I've been doing already, more of it, or I could try this other thing. And it's really exciting. And I've had many people say, it's like when they've heard me play in this kind of context, it's like, hey, you sound different. There's something different that this does to the way you play. And I totally agree. There's just something that's more freeing, or just more, I hear things in a different ways when I have these different kind of timbres going. So it's been pretty exciting to kind of like go down this new path, and it still seems really fresh to me, partly because I'm still total novice when it comes to all these pedals and stuff like that. I'm still like, wait, what's this one do? And it's like, I forget to hit that button, and oh man, I didn't have that one plugged in, and nothing works, So, but even that's kind of fun for me to kind of like sort of like, when am I going to get this all figured out?
Yeah,
It's a long time in the future, I think.
absolutely. Well, and speaking of your mentor, Mr. Bob Brookmeyer, Kansas City born legend,
Right.
it's weird that we're talking right now about all of this. I'm getting ready to produce. My next show is going to be all about Bob. I just interviewed Michael Stevens about the biography On the Way to the Sky and dug deep into Bob's history and his music from like the mid 50s all the way to the end of his life. So Bob is completely on my brain.
Wow. Yeah. Well, that's a good person to have on your brain.
It is.
Yeah.
And it's fascinating because when I think about the lore and the history of Kansas City Cats, you think about, Charlie Parker, you think about Pat Metheny, Bobby Watson, all these guys.
Count Basie.
Count Basie, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, but
Yeah.
you don't, for some reason, Bob's not in there. And it's a
Mm.
part, I think, of him and where he's at in the world of jazz. He's just not seen as this large figure, but he did so much. I mean, from Mulligan and Getz in the beginning to everything with the WDR and all these things that he did, being a mentor and bringing up cats like you, it's like his wield of influence is massive.
Yeah. Yeah. It's I feel really lucky to be. I was in the conservatory when he started teaching there, and I was right when he started. I was the first class, and so I always felt like, wow, I'm so lucky to be here on the ground floor, because then he was there for a decade after that, and just like more and more people. And then I just, I was living in New York, and all these people coming from NEC that had studied with Bob. And I'm like, well, yep, I can tell you've been studying with Bob, And then, people I had friends in New York that were been there since the 80s or whatever, or the 70s. And they were like, when he started the BMI Jazz Composers Workshop, 35 years ago or whatever it was now, there's like people that were involved in that, and they were people that I never knew before, like telling me the same things. They're like, well, Bob always said to do this, and I'm like, yeah, he did always say to do those things. And so it, and now it's kind of like almost an industry to kind of like talk about him amongst, modern big band composers. For sure, there's people that are just like total specialists, and that's kind of like the main thing that they focus on, and it's worthy, so again, it's like, and every serious jazz artist I've ever met are like, oh man, Bob Brookmeyer, he's
Yeah.
like the heaviest, But it's true that he never really kind of made it as a household name. Some of that probably is because, the kind of period where he wasn't really that active, from the, in the 1970s, and when he was trying to write music in
Yeah.
the West Coast and stuff like that too. So, but even so, you just never know who's going to like stay on, stay in the psyche.
But he's a musician's musician. There's a part of him, you know what I'm saying? And
Yeah.
there's people like that in all the creative arts where they may not be the superstar on the Walk of Fame, but they're the ones that everybody admires and respects. They're a towering figure, and there's something to be said about that. It's interesting. Um, Having a mentor in your life, that voice is always going to be in your head. You're always going to hear them talking to you.
Mm.
In these different incarnations, you're on your eighth album. Do you hear Bob talking to you all the time?
Oh yeah. Yeah, yeah. Especially when I played something that I'm like, oh, he would not have liked that. And he would have told me, it's like, I mean, I remember this. One thing I loved about him, and one thing that not everybody loves about him, is that he was totally direct, totally blunt, told you exactly what he felt all the time. And as the kind of student I was, it's like, that's what I wanted. I
Yeah.
wanted, I have no need for a cheerleader.
Yeah.
I need someone to tell me like what they think I could do better. And so that's what I remember. I mean, I remember all the warmth too,
Yeah.
right? And I remember the loft. That was never given with anger, like you suck. It was never like that. It's like, don't you want it to be better,
Yeah.
like this? Don't you want to love every note?
Yeah.
That was a big thing that he would say all the time. And so, and not only am I saying it to myself when I'm playing, but as a teacher, I mean, I basically can't teach without, in any context, classical music theory, which I do, orchestration, jazz rehearsals, improvisation, anything. It's like something Bob says, I quote on a regular basis, because it's
Yeah.
deep. It's deep,
Yeah.
and it's lasting, and and it's useful, not just musically but spiritually.
Absolutely. So ultimately, at the end of the day, with Denki, what do you want people to get from this album? What are you hoping the listener gets?
It's just that this sort of it's like a level of sonic excitement, that's kind of that's new for me. I know it's nothing like, it's not really like anything novel. There's been horn players that have been playing, with electronics for decades. I mean, Robin Eubanks I remember listening to him in the '90s, doing this kind of stuff. So like a lot of my things, I'm like not trying to like, be this incredibly innovative thing, but I think that as an improviser and as a composer, I have a kind of a distinctive thing to offer. That doesn't sound like the average person, and so this is just a new lens to kind of hear that. And I thought maybe some different kinds of people who aren't drawn to the acoustic thing so much, the bass drums and trombone. I understand maybe that's like not that appealing, but maybe the timbres of this is enough to kind of get people to kind of listen to things in a different way that they wouldn't otherwise if it was just like a regular jazz quartet, which I made 2 other jazz quartet records with basically same instrumentation, but it's a very different character. So I think there's stuff, and then of course, like always, like I want to have a lot of variety in the kind of tunes I include. So nothing like it's like, oh, another one of these. Oh, they're doing this again. Oh, they're rocking out again. It's like just try to have that sort of balance. And so I always feel like there's my records, and this is no different. It's like you might not be that into this tune, but listen to the next one because it's
Yeah.
going to be different.
Yeah. For sure. So what are you doing for live music? How are you rolling this out? What's going on with shows?
We've actually just did our last official CD release show, just on Sunday, in this my little town. You know, part of this getting this grant is we've involved my local community with this local, like, a community music center here, and we did our first rehearsal there before the recording session, and it was an open rehearsal, so a lot of people got to, you know, that from the town got to come and check out what we were doing, and then we brought it back to show them what it's done at the end. So we just did that on Sunday. We did a show in Minneapolis a couple of weeks ago, Berlin, and then last month I was in New York, and Satoshi got to play on that. So we did a show there. So now we're just looking at trying to book some more things next year. We are actually are committed. We're going to have another record come out in 2027,
Okay.
but it's going to be all music by this composer Scott Miller, he did one of the tracks on this recording. He's an
Yeah.
incredible composer, modern classical composer. Classical is in quotes. He does a lot of electronics and things like that. And so he got some money. He did a residency. He wrote a whole record's worth of music for us specifically. So that's super exciting to like have somebody who like wanted to like love the sound of this band that much. They want to like, I want to write music and on top of music on this. So we're really looking forward that we're probably going to record next summer.
Right on. So if anybody wants to get a copy of the album, is Bandcamp the best place to go?
Always Bandcamp's the best
Okay.
place. Yep.
All right. I love it. I will put links in the show notes. JC, great to catch back up with you. Thank you, man. I
Yeah.
appreciate it.
Thanks, Joe. It's always great to talk to you.
Yes, absolutely, sir.